Code blue hits before the syringe empties. The monitor screams. A bracelet flashes under harsh light. Wrong name, right room. The nurse freezes, hand hovering, dosage bag labeled correctly, patient ID not. Across the glass, a spouse watches, eyes locked on hers, a silent plea and a warning wrapped together. One life on the line, another entangled in secrecy. Staff swarm. Questions snap like clamps. Who verified? Who scanned? The nurse swallows an answer she can't afford to speak. She glances again at the window. He doesn't blink. Time is running out, and the first clue is hiding in plain sight. Consider the scene clinically. A catastrophic medication error intersects with an identity swap, and the result is irreversible. We trace not just the act, but the drift, the small compromises that accumulate into a fatal choice. The thing is, a hospital's quality assurance investigation doesn't chase villains. It maps behavior against policy, pressure against judgment, and motive against process. That's our lens. We move backward from the moment the monitor flatlined, then forward into the aftermath. Here's the spine of the case. An incident report lands on a QA desk with neutral language. Adverse event, code response, time of death recorded. QA begins with the basics: chart audit, medication administration record, barcode scan logs, pharmacy dispense data. Then, the human layer. Staff interviews, visitor badges, badge access to doors, and the unit's staffing pattern on that shift. We build the timeline first. Meaning is layered after. Think about this like a locked box. The nurse's mind contains why. We can't open it directly, so we read the scratches on the lid, her choices, edits, movements, and the anomalies they leave in systems designed to remember. Every click in the electronic record leaves a fingerprint. Every door badge creates a breadcrumb. We align those with the physical reality: who stood where, who spoke to whom, what was in whose hand when the line crossed from safe to lethal. We define our scope. This is a medication dosage mix-up triggered by an ID bracelet mismatch, not an elaborate conspiracy. A convergence, workload, alarm fatigue, a fragmented handoff, and boundary erosion between a nurse and a patient's spouse. The moral tension is precise: professional duty versus personal desire. If that bond is covert, then protocols begin to feel negotiable. Negotiable becomes optional. Optional becomes omitted. Now, the structure of the timeline. We start at the moment the wrong medication reached the wrong patient. We examine the labels, the order sets, the independent double-check the policy requires for high-alert drugs. We confirm whether a second verifier documented the check, or whether the record shows a canceled scan and a self-verification. Then, we step back by hours to find the first slip. A documented dose time that doesn't match the scanner's timestamp. A progress note edited after the time of death. A visitor badge reissued after the door should have locked down. Moving from the scene to the profiles involved, we map 3 centers of gravity. The nurse, competent, trusted, showing subtle boundary drift long before the crisis. The spouse, vulnerable, persistent, learning the unit's rhythms, using access to regulate fear. And eventually, influence. The patient, the unseen center requiring precise dosing with allergies and safeguards documented, yet silenced by sedation and fatigue. The system, policies present, enforcement inconsistent under pressure. We clarify the QA process in plain terms. Step 1. Gather artifacts, med logs, chart entries, pharmacy records, telemetry, imaging schedules, transport tickets, visitor data. Step 2. Interview staff separately, then cross-check statements with the artifacts. Step 3. Map policy to practice. What should have happened, what actually happened, and why the gap opened. Step 4. Construct a minute-by-minute timeline around the critical window. Step 5. Identify contributing factors: human, technical, cultural. Step 6. Recommendations: prevention, not punishment alone. The first clue is always hidden in plain sight. In this case, it's the canceled barcode scan and a reattempt logged seconds later, paired with a mismatch in patient identity data. On paper, the dose looks correct. In the system, the trail shows the dose verified against the wrong identity, which brings us to the inciting pressure: a shift swap, a truncated handoff, and an "I'll explain later" text that shifts the nurse's attention at the exact wrong time. Stick around, because the motive is far stranger than the method. The method is predictable. A policy meant to slow you down gets bypassed when time compresses. The motive is a quieter instrument. Emotional reinforcement becomes the lever. Praise from the spouse translates into confidence. Confidence erodes caution. When the monitor screamed, it wasn't just a medical crisis, it was a collision of secrecy and procedure. So, our path is set. We will peel back the layers: boundary drift, leverage, the patient's diminishing agency, the shift swap, the first protocol slip, and the near miss that should have stopped everything. Then, the identity swap, the fatal dosage, and the cover-up mechanics: chart edits, retroactive visitor logs, and a bracelet fragment in a trash stream. Finally, the QA inquiry that turns the locked box slowly, hearing the tumblers click. Start with competence. She was the nurse other nurses asked when the pump argued or the drip rate drifted. Calm hands, precise notes, an easy manner that settled jittery families. On paper, exemplary, in person, steady. That's how boundary drift hides, not in chaos, but in competence that begins to believe it's the exception to the rule. Consider the workload. Nights stack on nights, rotations stretch, the unit hums at a frequency that wears down attention. Sleep fragments. Meals become coffee. Isolation grows in the seams between shifts. When you live inside fluorescent light, small human moments feel like oxygen. The profile shows this pattern. Messages sent after midnight. Charting completed at 3 a.m. Perfect. Almost too neat. The exterior remains polished while the interior frays. The drift begins small. A spouse lingers at the doorway longer than visiting hours allow. She doesn't push them away. She says, "It's fine, as long as you're quiet." It feels compassionate. The spouse asks questions, detailed ones. She gives time she doesn't have, answering with care that edges beyond clinical. "Text the unit if you're worried," she says once, meaning the main number. Later, the spouse uses her personal phone. She replies because it seems cruel not to. She rationalizes. Support is part of care. Families need anchors. If she can reduce anxiety, the patient benefits. Cognitive dissonance smooths the edges of policy. She knows the boundary, but she places her feet just inside it and tells herself the floor is still safe. The profile calls this exceptionalism, the belief that rule bending is justified because outcomes improve in your hands. It's a subtle shift. It feels like virtue. Early warning signs surface, soft and deniable. A colleague notes that she spends more time in that room. She jokes it off. They're nervous, that's all. A charge nurse glances at her phone during rounds. She flips it face down and keeps moving. A tech mentions the spouse's habit of arriving at shift change, catching her in the hall. She frames it as diligence. She thanks the spouse for being involved. Reinforcement arrives, gratitude, eye contact, the steady drip of appreciation that becomes a psychological reward. Then, the micro-breach. After-hours messaging that references personal life. Not chart updates, not pain scores. A photograph of the patient's hand holding the spouse's, sent at 2:14 a.m., with a caption, "He squeezed." She replies with a heart. It's nothing, she tells herself. It's human. She doesn't log the interaction. There's no field in the record for that kind of moment. The system can't catch what it wasn't designed to see. Workload pressure meets emotional relief. She begins to seek the spouse's thanks the way others seek a quiet break room. Praise becomes a lever. You always explain things, the spouse says. You make it less scary. The words stick. They validate her long nights and missed meals. They make the extra minutes feel necessary. They create an invisible ledger where she invests time and attention and expects trust in return. That trust will later purchase shortcuts. Decision fatigue sets the stage. On heavy nights, she scans less, flows more. Each step that adds friction, two-person checks, barcode rescans, walking back to the medroom, feels like noise. She still completes procedures, but she sequences them in ways that fit her rhythm rather than policy order. She documents beautifully, planning to fill gaps after the rush. I'll fix it later becomes a habit. Later shrinks. Subtle boundary crossings become routine. The spouse learns the unit's rhythms. When the doors are staffed lightly, when the MedPass window opens, where the vending machines offer a cover for lingering. She doesn't teach this, but she doesn't stop it. She holds doors with her elbow, keeps moving, tells herself the focus is the patient. She becomes the spouse's point of access to information, to reassurance, to the comforting illusion that rules can bend without consequence. A near miss reinforces the cycle. She catches a dose discrepancy at the scanner and corrects instantly. The spouse sees her competence and says, "You're the only one I trust." That sentence lands like a medal. It also tightens a knot. If she is the one they trust, she must always be available. If she is always available, boundaries thin. The profile notes the loop: praise, risk, successful save, more praise. Each loop reduces her sensitivity to risk. Peers notice, but softly. "You okay?" someone asks. "You're always here?" She smiles it off. "I'm fine." She isn't. Sleep is light. Thoughts race. She checks her phone in the parking garage before going home, looking for a message that will justify the next extra shift, the next after-hours text, the next small exception. This is how drift works. It asks for very little, very often, until you forget the original line. Her language shifts. Policies become suggestions. "We can be flexible," she says, "as long as it's safe." Safety becomes something she personally guarantees rather than something the system ensures. That's a red flag. Safety by promise instead of process is brittle. It holds until it doesn't. Then the dependency crystallizes. She feels responsible for the spouse's calm, not just the patient's care. If the spouse panics, she has failed. If they stay steady, she has succeeded. That emotional metric begins to weigh more than protocol in the moment. And the moment is where errors are born. Attention becomes the motive. What began as compassion now fuels choice. She answers the text during handoff. She allows a linger during MedPass. She decides to scan later to avoid awkwardness. Each is a small, rationalized step. Together they form a path. The profile doesn't villainize, it maps. And the map shows the line she crossed long before the bracelet did. Across town, unaware of the fatal clock already winding down, the spouse rehearses questions in a parked car. The profile reads, "Anxious attachment, heightened by medical uncertainty. Every beep equals danger. Every delay equals abandonment." They come to the unit hungry for certainty, the way a mind under stress craves control. The nurse's steadiness becomes a sedative. Grief doesn't wait for outcomes. It starts when the illusion of safety cracks. The spouse reaches for reassurance and finds it in the nurse's tone, measured, clear, unfailingly responsive. That tone becomes a tether. It feels like care. It also feels like access. The distinction blurs when need and desire share a corridor. Signals mix early. A hand lingers on a forearm after an update. The spouse leans in to ask a follow-up, voice low, gratitude thick. "You make sense when no one else does." It's a compliment, but also a hook. Praise creates debt. The nurse pays the debt with time. Time buys intimacy. Intimacy invites more ask. Power asymmetry tilts the room. The nurse controls information flow, timing, and the small mercies that make unbearable hours tolerable. The spouse learns the rhythm of that power. Shift change quiets oversight. Late nights thin the herd. Certain alarms bring crowds while others bring nobody. They adapt. They become a fixture just outside sightlines. Presence becomes policy by repetition. Language reveals the subtext. I just need someone who understands, the spouse says, when a night stretches with no improvement. You get it. The words carry more than need. They carry selection. You, not the team, not the plan. You. Selection flatters. Selection isolates. Once you're the chosen interpreter, you start translating even when you shouldn't. Access compounds, visitor badges become routine. A volunteer waves them through on recognition. Security hears family and nods. The spouse starts bringing small comforts. Coffee slipped to the nurse during a long med pass, a warm thanks that reads as kindness and functions as leverage. The gesture says, "We're close." Closeness becomes currency for bending rules. The mind as a locked box opens with insecurity as the key. The spouse fears losing the patient. They also fear being powerless. Control returns in small wins, getting answers faster, staying later, stepping around a posted sign with a quiet apology. Each win teaches the same lesson. Rules respond to persistence. That lesson scales. Motives tangle. At first it's simple. Keep the patient alive. Then complexity creeps in. The nurse's attention soothes, and soothing becomes addictive. A late-night text about vitals morphs into a message about not sleeping, about missing touch, about the way hospitals ruin time. The nurse replies carefully, then less carefully. The spouse feels seen. Need becomes intimacy. Intimacy becomes secrecy. Secrecy bonds. "Please don't mention I was here after hours," the spouse whispers, breath quick, eyes searching the nurse's face. "I'll get in trouble." The nurse nods. Now they share risk. Shared risk intensifies loyalty. Loyalty, in turn, lowers both their thresholds for exceptions. If I keep your secret, you'll keep mine. If you keep mine, you'll help me. The spouse learns medication timing by osmosis. When the card appears, when the scanner beeps, when the nurse lingers to explain side effects. Information becomes a map, and a map is power. They start to arrive just before critical windows, framing proximity as worry. Is this the one that makes him sleepy? The question anchors them next to the decision point. Subtle manipulation shows as urgency. He was twitching, they say, even when telemetry shows baseline. Urgency demands a response. Response keeps them in the nurse's orbit. Emergencies become pretexts for contact, not fabricated, but curated, selecting the scariest details, omitting the stabilizing ones. The narrative tilts toward intervention, which requires permission, which the nurse grants with presence. The affair doesn't announce itself. It accrues. A hand held too long in a quiet alcove. A voicemail saved and replayed. "I can't do this without you," the spouse writes, then deletes, then sends. The nurse answers with caution, then warmth. They move from hallway confidences to a dark corner outside the med room where cameras don't quite reach. Mutual secrecy locks the door. Risk tolerance rises. If they weren't caught last night, tonight feels safer. If the nurse smoothed a policy once, surely it can be smoothed again. The spouse tests the edges. Could you check early? Could I sit in while you start it? Could you just this once? Each ask is small. Each yes lowers the next yes's bar. The patient's condition becomes the fulcrum. Worsening labs tighten the spouse's grip. Improvements spike hope and deepen attachment to the nurse as the deliverer of good news. The spouse's need, the nurse's reassurance, and the system's soft spots align. Vulnerability meets leverage, and leverage, applied at the wrong moment, moves more than feelings. It moves procedure. Now let's return to the bed at the center of all this. The patient's chart is clear, a condition that demands precision, not heroics. High alert medication, narrow therapeutic window, titration guided by labs and weight, with allergies flagged in bright bands across the banner of the electronic record. The safeguards are there: barcode IDs, two-person verification, standardized dosing protocols, each one designed to separate intention from error. The patient relies on that scaffolding because their own voice is faint. Fatigue blunts advocacy. Sedation narrows the world to a ceiling tile and a cycle of beeps that wash together. On good hours, they nod. On bad hours, they drift. Consent becomes a series of small nods and murmurs parceled out between pain and sleep. The record notes periods of confusion as a baseline risk. That means every safeguard must compensate for what the patient cannot assert: identity, dose, timing, allergy. Allergies sit near the top like a stop sign. A known reaction to a common adjunct med, cross-sensitivity to a class that sometimes slips into order, sets by habit. It's documented. It's acknowledged. It should be unmissable. The bracelet mirrors the chart. The scanner should reconcile both. That's the theory. Practice: the bracelet must match the body, and the scan must match the bracelet. Swap any link, and the chain fails without making a sound. Here's the cruel irony. The patient trusts a system designed exactly for people in their state: tired, medicated, vulnerable. The system is supposed to bridge the gap between frail agency and complex care. It can when followed. It cannot when turned into ritual rather than rule. The patient looks peaceful in notes, but that peace is dependency. They are held by process. Family dynamics hover at the edges of the chart in social history lines. Supportive spouse present at bedside frequently, high anxiety, needs frequent explanation. No malice revealed, no hidden plots. Just a real relationship under strain, pressing against policy in soft, persistent ways. The patient's past hints at patterns: long stretches where the spouse carried household burdens, periods of illness where reassurance became currency. In the room, that history translates into the spouse stepping forward when the patient recedes. The knife on the wall appears innocuous. A brief policy mention in an orientation document. Temporary ID bracelets can be used during imaging turnovers, but must be reconciled immediately upon return to the unit. It's a line most staff can recite. It exists because human movement creates identification risk. It's a known hazard, managed by a known control, but controls require attention. Attention was already divided. Labs mark the cadence of care. Potassium here, creatinine there, a trending value that informs whether the high alert med moves at one rate or another. The patient's numbers justify caution. The algorithm says slow and steady, frequent checks, clear documentation of double verification. That's the standard. The patient's body is doing what bodies do under stress, sending signals that can be misread if the identity tag attached to them belongs to someone else. On rounds, the patient squeezes the spouse's hand, a small victory that feeds hope. Later, they don't wake to their name the first time. Names become critical because names anchor medication orders to a person. The patient's name, similar to the new admission across the hall, is a latent hazard tucked into routine. Similar names sit in every unit. That's why scanners exist. That's why bracelets matter more than familiarity. Limited voice, limited agency, rising risk. The patient recedes into the bed the way night recedes into morning, incrementally, almost invisibly. The monitor's numbers become their representation. The nurse reads those numbers with skill. The spouse reads the nurse with craving. The patient trusts both because the system taught them to. They believe in the rules because the rules are the only thing they have. A schedule change slides into the margins. Transport moves the patient early for a scan. The unit adjusts. The policy insists the bracelet follows identity, not the bed. A temporary swap occurs, a placeholder that should last minutes. The placeholder lingers. The patient returns tired and quiet. The wrong plastic ring, ordinary and unremarkable, stays locked around a wrist that won't complain. The stage is set. One body, two names within arm's reach, and a protocol that can save them only if it's obeyed without exception. 3 hours earlier, the unit board blinked and reshuffled. A call-out. A float nurse diverted. The charge nurse eyed the gaps and asked for favors. She said yes to staying late before she checked the weight of the hours behind her. Decision fatigue had already set its hooks. The handoff shortened to headlines instead of paragraphs. A resident rushed. A respiratory therapist waved from a doorway. Friction rose. Attention splintered. Chart handoff should have been slow and deliberate. It wasn't. Vital trends skimmed. Allergy alerts acknowledged without the ritual of repetition that burns them into working memory. A quick, no changes, replaced a full med review. The transport tech appeared early with a clipboard and apologized. Imaging had a window. The patient went sooner than planned, and with them, the risk moved out of alignment with the plan. Alarm fatigue is not noise, it's erosion. After a morning of false positives and low-priority dings, the nurse tuned the unit's soundscape to survive. Important tones still cut through. The rest became wallpaper. When the phone buzzed in her pocket, it cut cleaner than any monitor because it belonged to someone who had become a private priority. The message, "Are you on tonight? I need to talk." The 3 dots returned before she could type. Please, she should have ignored it until break. Instead, she answered fast, "I'm here. Call if urgent." That small door cracked and urgency walked through on cue. A second text. "Can you stay? I can't wait for the morning." She replied, "I'm on late. I'll check in." The promise wasn't clinical. It was personal. It committed her to proximity when distance was safer. Badge access logs captured truth to the second. They would later show her leaving the unit after her scheduled shift should have ended, then returning, then lingering at interior doors without a clinical task attached. In the moment, she framed it as dedication. She stayed because the unit was short. She stayed because the spouse needed her. Those reasons merged until they were indistinguishable. The patient returned from imaging with a temporary bracelet meant to bridge an administrative gap. The policy is simple. Temporary identifiers are reconciled immediately upon return, with a visual check against the permanent band and the EMR banner. In practice, reconciling requires uninterrupted attention. She planned to do it after settling the patient and charting the transport details. Then, a bed alarm down the hall chirped. A lab called with a critical value for another patient. The transport tech apologized again and left. The placeholder lingered. She told herself it would be 2 minutes. She adjusted the pillow. She silenced a nuisance alarm. She opened the chart to document the return time. A colleague caught her at the door with a quick, "Can you peek at my drip rate?" She glanced, corrected, and thanked. When she turned back, the spouse was at the unit door, holding a lukewarm coffee like a peace offering. "I know it's after hours," they said softly. I need to see him. I'll be quick." This is where policy bends. Visitor access after hours requires charge approval. She looked for the charge nurse and saw only moving backs. 2 minutes, she said, quietly. She scanned the badge. The system pinged acceptance because familiarity had become its own pass. The access record would later show the reissue time, as if it were always intended. In the moment, it felt like kindness. Inside the room, the spouse's eyes went to the monitor, then to her. Is he okay? The question demanded attention now, not later. She stepped to the bedside, checked the line, and narrated calm. He's back from imaging. Vitals are stable. The spouse exhaled, then leaned closer. I need to tell you something. Urgency, not about the patient, but about the two of them. She felt the pivot and should have redirected. She didn't. Not here, she whispered. Later. A small ID exception arrived disguised as efficiency. The scanner at the bedside hiccuped on the temporary bracelet. She canceled the scan, intending to re-verify in the chart and scan again after reconciling the band. A second alarm down the hall cut across her plan. She made a mental note. Later, she told herself, 2 minutes. She walked the spouse to the window and said, "Stay outside while I med pass." They nodded, obedient, invested. The gesture communicated intimacy without contact. It also placed the spouse within sight of the pivotal task. Her attention split along that sight line. The unit hummed. Her phone face down vibrated once. She didn't look, but she heard the echo of it in her chest. Once you bend policy, it bends you back. The handoff remained truncated. The temporary band remained unreconciled. The spouse remained present within the MedPass window. The logs would later show the linger. The timeline would compress to a 20-minute span where everything meaningful happened just out of order. And in that compression, the conditions for a fatal choice assembled quietly, perfectly, waiting for a single, tired yes. As the door closed behind her, the unit's noise narrowed to a steady hiss. She rolled the medcart to the bedside and woke the scanner. Policy dictates an independent double-check for the high-alert dose. 2 sets of eyes, 2 brains, 1 scan tied to 1 identity. She knew that. She'd taught that. Tonight, she told herself, I know this patient. I've got this. Tension first. She wants speed and calm. The unit wants her in 3 places, and the consequence of failure is lethal. The scanner chirped at the temporary band again, no match to the order. She canceled the alert, intending to reconcile and return. The system recorded the cancel. She told herself it bought time. It actually erased friction. She keyed the medication administration record and scrolled to the ordered dose. Calculations sat in the order set, weight adjusted, already double-checked by pharmacy. The independent verification field blinked, empty, waiting for a second badge. She hovered. She could call the float nurse. She could pull a colleague. She didn't. She typed her own initials as verify later, a mental IOU she had no bandwidth to honor. Action next. She drew the dose. Air flicked from the syringe with practiced efficiency. The spouse's shadow passed the window, a metronome for her divided attention. Down the hall, a monitor alarmed with that tone, everyone hates, urgent but likely artifact. She paused, listened, decided it wasn't hers, and pressed forward. She scanned the bag label instead of the bracelet, a workaround that often matches when identity is correct. Tonight, identity wasn't correct. Conflict escalated quietly. The barcode system accepted the medication scan tied to the chart she had open, patient A's chart, because she hadn't switched back after documenting transport. The bracelet still wore patient B's temporary ID from imaging. The chain broke at verification, but nothing screamed. The confirmation ping sounded like safety. It was only compliance with a partial rule. Complication arrived as a whisper. He's sweating more, the spouse murmured through the glass, mouth forming the words without sound. Her eyes darted up, then down, then back to the Maillard. Sweat could be baseline. It could be room temp. It could be nothing. It was a distraction exactly when her brain needed a full load. She hooked the line, primed the port, and glanced at the pump. The independent double-check field still blinked. She tapped it again, as if persistence could summon a second nurse from the air. It didn't. She toggled to self-verify, a feature meant for emergent use when a second verifier could not be found in time for life-saving interventions. This wasn't that, but in the moment it felt adjacent. Turn. A small decision hardened into practice. The first slip became the new baseline. She pushed the plunger gently, narrating reassurance to a patient, rousing just enough to look at her face. "You're okay," she said softly. The patient's eyes drifted closed. Her phone vibrated against the cart's metal lip. She didn't read the text. She heard it anyway. Across the unit, a colleague called out, "Can someone witness this heparin?" The irony didn't land. She finished the push and documented, "Given as ordered," with the time blinking exact to the second. The scanner log would later show the cancel preceding the med scan by 23 seconds. The independent check field would show her initials twice. The system accepted the narrative. The body would not. She flushed the line, capped the port, and watched the monitor. Nothing dramatic, no immediate storm. That's how near misses train you. When shortcuts don't explode, they become roadways. She almost felt relief. The spouse lifted a hand in a half wave, gratitude written in posture. She felt that too. Praise is a strong drug. She stepped out to the sink, washed, and scribbled a quick note about comfort measures while planning to backfill the full assessment. Documentation later. She had later scheduled everywhere. The charge nurse passed with a clipboard, caught her eye and said, "You good?" She smiled. "Yes." The word locked the door. The QA red flag planted here was subtle. A mismatch between the timestamp on the MIR and the physical presence of a second verifier anywhere near the room. Badge proximity data would later show her alone. The canceled scan would sit like a breadcrumb. The visitor access ping would place the spouse within sight of the med pass. None of that yelled in real time. Back at the bedside, she checked the pump history, saw the dose log, and felt the comfort of recorded action. Humans trust records they create. It's a bias. It's also a trap. She tucked the syringe into the sharps, smoothed the sheet, and told herself she'd reconcile the bracelet after she answered the call light down the hall. 2 minutes. As the moment closed, the unit's rhythm shifted. The false alarm resolved itself. The hallway quieted. For a breath, she stood in a pocket where the correct step would have been simple. Stop, verify, switch the chart, scan the right band, document the second check with a real second nurse. She didn't take it. She moved instead. Everything changed when she accepted that the system had accepted her shortcut. Acceptance became permission. Permission became precedent. The first protocol slip wasn't spectacular. It was ordinary. It was a nurse, under pressure, doing something she'd gotten away with before. The trouble was, tonight, the first slip aligned with a temporary bracelet, a distracted mind, and a watcher at the window who made her feel chosen. As the moment passed, she pivoted to containment. Secrets need quiet. She opened her phone under the desk and deleted the latest thread, then the next, then the photos that made her chest feel both light and tight. She installed a private app with disappearing messages, convinced that if the record vanished, the risk would too. The mind treats deletion like absolution. Systems do not. Tension first. She wants distance on paper, closeness in practice, and the consequence is exposure. She told herself the affair wasn't real if it lived between breaths and hallways. She told herself the patient's needs came first because the medication had gone in without fireworks. The calm after the push felt like proof. It wasn't. It was the eye of a storm. Action? She moved to perfect performance. Vitals documented to the minute. Mouth care charted. A pain reassessment posted exactly at the interval policy loves. She made the room look textbook. She made herself look unbreakable. That's a common tactic. Overcompensate invisible domains to mask drift in the invisible. Colleagues nodded as she passed. Machine, one said, admiring. Reinforcement landed where doubt should have grown. The spouse texted from the window. "You okay?" She replied with a period and nothing else. The punctuation said everything. Wait. He sent a thumbs up, then, if anyone asks, I was dropping off coffee earlier. She stared at that line, an alibi offered without being requested. It felt like care. It functioned like collusion. A colleague noticed the spouse's proximity, head tilted. They're here late a lot, they murmured at the desk. Family, she answered, neutral, eyes on the screen. The colleague shrugged, moved on. Missed opportunity. The unit was busy, and no one wants to be the ethics officer at midnight. Normalization lives in silence. She doubled down. She wiped her name off the whiteboard and rewrote it with cleaner lettering. She refilled the glove box. She answered call lights that weren't hers. A manager stepped through for a head count and said, "You're a rock star tonight." Praise hit exactly where fear lived. She smiled and said thanks. Not I need a break, not my boundaries are fraying, not I made an exception. The chance to interrupt the slide evaporated. The truth was worse than fatigue. Care quality now hinged on secrecy. She triaged tasks not by acuity alone, but by who might notice what. The bracelet reconciliation kept slipping down the list because doing it meant admitting it wasn't already done. She told herself she'd fix it after rounds, after baths, after meds, later kept moving. The spouse messaged again. I can help. What do you need me to say if someone asks why I'm here? She typed, don't, then deleted it. She wrote, stick to visiting hours, deleted that too. She settled on, say you needed an update. It was the smallest lie that could hold shape. Action. She created buffer. She walked the spouse to the family lounge and said firmly, wait here. She framed it as policy. He nodded, wounded. I'm not trying to make it harder, he said. Subtext, make it easier, just for us. She held the boundary in that moment and felt proud, as if one good choice could cancel the bad ones. It can't. It only slows the bleed. QA would later see the try-fail cycle clearly. Attempt to sanitize the record, message deletions, attempt to manage optics, perfect charting, attempt to control witness, lounge exile. Each try failed because the underlying condition persisted, the undisclosed relationship shaping decisions at the bedside. Complication, a nurse from the next pod asked, can you witness my insulin? She followed, gloves on, voice steady, and did it by the book. The act reset her self-image. See, I am safe. The brain loves a confirming example. It ignores the disconfirming one still ticking in room 12. She returned to find the patient drifting, numbers within the band, but edging. She adjusted the pillow, checked the line, and considered paging for a second set of eyes. Pride intervened. So did the memory of the canceled scan. If she called now, someone might glance at the band. The band might lead to questions. Questions might lead to her. The spouse, restless, reappeared at the glass. She shook her head, firm. He mouthed, sorry. Then, thank you. The words soothed and tightened. Gratitude is a leash when you crave it. She felt it pull. She opened the EMR to reconcile the temporary band. The field waited for a visual confirmation and a cosign. She hovered over the cosign box, cursor flickering. She could pull the float nurse. She could make this right. A call light chimed. The charge nurse waved an order set in her direction. A transporter asked about another patient's return. Decision fatigue whispered, later. Turn. She chose concealment over correction. Not with a bold lie, but with tiny omissions. The cosign left blank. The bracelet check deferred. The spouse parked just out of camera. She told herself she was containing the secret. She was feeding it. And secrets expand to fill the space you give them. The near miss didn't announce itself. It slid in on a quiet beep from the pump and a soft flutter on the waveform that could have been nothing. She felt it first as a prickle across the back of her neck. The line looked clean. The bag label matched the chart she still had open. The scanner history showed, given. The problem was upstream. Identity. Tension first. She wants proof she's safe. The system offers signals, not certainty. If she's wrong, the consequence is catastrophic exposure. If she's right, she buys another hour of denial. She reached for the scanner again, as if a second pass could rewrite the earlier cancel. The temporary bracelet resisted. No match. She canceled the alert again. This time, she caught herself. A breath. A pause. Then the small corrective action that should have come earlier. She toggled to the patient search, typed in the legal name as printed on the permanent band, and realized the EMR banner on her screen did not match the wrist in the bed. Her stomach tightened. Action, she corrected quickly. She flipped the chart to the right account, re-verified the MAR, and logged a sanitized note. Barcode read error at bedside, medication verified with visual ID, and order set. It read like competence. It was a patch over a crack with water behind it. Across the glass, the spouse watched her settle the tubing with practiced calm. They saw a command where she felt wobble, and the bond deepened. "You always catch it," he mouthed, a proud secret between them. Praise landed. She nodded once, keeping her face still. QA later flagged a small discrepancy. The scanner log showed one canceled scan and one successful scan less than a minute apart, with the successful scan tied to the chart switch, not the band. That's a textbook footprint of a workaround, verified by chart pick rather than by patient-worn identity. It often ends in safety. Tonight, it became an omen. She told herself it was a one-off. The mind loves sunk cost psychology. If you've already invested risk, you double down to avoid admitting the investment was flawed. So she did what competent people do when rattled. She worked her checklist. She rechecked vitals. She listened for the subtle signs. The monitor steadied. The room held. The unit culture helped normalize it. Minor workarounds were the grease in the machine. Everyone had a story. The scanner hates room 8. Transport bands always glitch. We know our patients. Each line was a small permission slip. She pocketed hers and moved on. But the ID bracelet had become Chekhov's gun. It lay on the wrist like an ordinary prop, loaded with consequence. She could have disarmed it then. Stop, reconcile, call a second verifier, document the fix. She almost did. She even peeled a corner of the temporary band, just enough to see the adhesive lift. Then, an overhead call. Rapid assessment to another pod. She pressed the band back down. Later. Complication arrived disguised as teamwork. A colleague wheeled a second patient past the door and asked, "Can you eyeball his color?" She stepped out, scanned, said, "He's fine," and returned. In those 40 seconds, the spouse slipped from the lounge to the window, closer than before. When she re-entered, he stepped back, hands up. "Sorry, I thought he looked pale." He didn't. The comment wasn't about the patient, it was about staying in her orbit. Back at the bedside, she tried to reset the ritual. "Name and date of birth," she asked softly, more for herself than for charting. The patient mumbled, off by a syllable. Post-sedation confusion, normal in context, dangerous in proximity to a mismatched band. She corrected gently, and he blinked, compliant. She felt both relief and dread. The system's redundancy depends on clear answers. Tonight, it got mud. She added a note. Patient intermittently disoriented, reoriented to place and time. It was true. It also cushioned her from future blame by framing errors as patient-related. That's how cover-ups begin, not with lies, but with true statements arranged to mislead. Then, the near miss peaked. She prepared a routine adjunct dose, low risk on any other night, high risk in a chain already stressed. She scanned the vial. The system matched the open chart. She reached for the wrist to scan the band and hesitated. The temporary plastic caught the light. She froze. This was the fork. Action. She backed away, set the vial down, and hit the call light. "I need a second set of eyes," she said, when a colleague appeared. "Scanner's acting up." The colleague stepped in, casual, helpful, unaware of the narrative weight. They did a straight-by-the-book verification. Patient states name, band matches banner, order matches, MAR, medication scanned, 2 badges entered. The system sang its happy beep. Dose given correctly. Near miss averted. Turn, success, but not the kind that resets behavior. It did the opposite. Her brain filed the event under proof of competence. "See? You paused, you called for help, you're safe." The truth was harsher. She nearly dosed the wrong patient because a secret rerouted her attention and a temporary ban stayed on too long. The save didn't erase the conditions, it masked them. QA would later circle this entry as the hinge, the canceled scan, the chart switch, the clean 2-person check for the second, smaller dose. The contrast between the two events told the story. When watched, she followed ritual flawlessly. When alone, she negotiated. That pattern is the profile. She told herself, this was the last time. She texted the spouse, "Can't talk now." "Boundaries," he replied. "Understood. Proud of you." That last line hooked her again. She straightened the sheet, checked the line, and promised herself she would reconcile the band after rounds. She didn't know the next interruption was already on its way down the hall, carrying a new admission with a name 1 letter off and a bracelet fresh from the printer. The moment he left, everything went wrong. Transport rolled a new patient into the adjacent room. Same age bracket, similar diagnosis shorthand, a name that shared 4 letters and a rhythm. The printer spit out a fresh bracelet. A tech, efficient and tired, clipped it on while the charge nurse fielded 2 calls. Across 2 doorways, the unit looked like order. It wasn't. Tension first. She wants to stabilize the flow, finish rounds, reconcile the temporary band, and clear her backlog. The unit wants speed. The consequence of failure is identity collapse. She stepped to the nurse's station to sign a lab receipt. In that 30-second gap, small currents moved. Action. Imaging called back with a question about the previous scan. "Can you confirm the time he left the floor?" she was asked. She pulled up the chart she thought she'd been in, patient A's, and gave the time. Correct for A. The transporter waiting at room 13 overheard "off the floor at 1942, misread the comment as applying to his new arrival, and logged his own note with those digits. An innocent echo. A seed of confusion. In room 12, a tech tidied the patient's wrist and, seeing the temporary band awkwardly placed, loosened it to rotate for comfort. The permanent band had slipped up the forearm during the scan and never returned to its original spot. The tech intended to sort it after vitals. Then, an overhead call redirected them. The temporary stayed dominant. Chekhov's band, now the loudest sign. Across the hall, a volunteer walked the new patient's spouse to the wrong doorway and corrected with a laugh. "Names are so close," they said. "Happens all the time." It does. That's why the system doesn't trust laughter. It trusts plastic and scans, except the plastic was wrong, and the scan had been canceled earlier. Layered error, now primed. She returned to room 12 to reconcile. At the threshold, the spouse stepped close, voice tight. "I can't carry this anymore." Not about labs, about them. The confession she'd deferred now pressed into the doorway of a safety task. "Not here," she said, low. "Later." He grabbed her wrist, not hard, but charged. "I dream about you," he whispered. The sentence cut through her plan like a scalpel. She removed his hand, eyes on the patient. "Please," she said. "Wait." The interruption cost her the sequence. In safety work, sequence is everything. She approached the bed, reached for the band to match to the EMR banner, and, thinking she'd done this earlier, defaulted to the MAR already open on patient A's chart. The band she saw read like a match in shape and color. The name, close enough to slide past a mind primed by stress, past her internal check. She told herself she'd do the second verifier after she dealt with the spouse. 2 minutes. In room 13, a float nurse attempted a concurrent med pass. Their scanner hiccuped on the new patient's fresh bracelet and threw a "scan again" prompt. They canceled and planned to re-verify, another small IOU added to the unit's ledger. 2 rooms, 2 cancels, same 30-minute window. Back at 12, telemetry pinged a mild variation that meant nothing on its own. She adjusted the pillow, narrated calm, and focused on the pump. The spouse outside the window mouthed, "I'm sorry." She nodded once. That nod transferred intimacy back into the room, a subtle handoff of attention that pulled her away from the ritual she needed to complete. She turned to leave and nearly collided with transport returning another patient to the pod. The hallway narrowed. She stepped sideways, bumped her hip on the med cart, and watched a stack of unlabeled caps tilt, spill, clatter. She bent to gather them. When she stood, the charge nurse asked, "Can you take a new arrival? We're thin." "Yes," she said, because that's who she was. The yes that would cost everything. Now, the identity swap. In the shuffle, a housekeeping staffer wiping surfaces lifted a chart face sheet for room 12 to clean under it and set it down 1 slot to the right. The header, nearly identical, stared up at the next person to glance. That person was her. She grabbed the face sheet to confirm a lab, and for a moment, the name she saw aligned with the wrong band she'd half-checked minutes earlier. Tiny, silent confirmation bias. The kind that kills. She carried that false alignment into the next step. Prepping the high-alert dose scheduled for Patient A, whose numbers and weight justified a careful titration. Patient B, the body wearing A's temporary band, did not share those parameters. The system would have blocked the mismatch if the scan sequence had restarted clean. It hadn't. The canceled scan earlier had taught the software the wrong lesson about her intent. It trusted her open chart. Then, the spouse moved at the exact wrong moment. He stepped into the doorway, eyes wet, voice barely a sound. "If you're not here tonight, I'm not sure I can hold it together." It wasn't a threat. It landed like one. She pivoted to protect him from the attention the charge nurse's passing glance might bring. "Family in the lounge," she said, firm, her hand guiding, her body blocking the view of the pump. The guidance was meant to reduce risk. It increased it. The reconciliation step slipped again. Midpoint reversal, love, misnamed, unbounded attention, became the conduit for a fatal error. 2 patients with similar names, a temporary bracelet left unreconciled, a cancel scan that normalized a workaround, a confession at a doorway that derailed a simple check. The wrong bracelet remained on the right wrist. The right medication now pointed at the wrong identity. Everything looked acceptable because every layer had a story. Turn. She would plan to fix it after this dose, after this conversation, after this rapid, later. But time was running out. The timeline, already compressed, began to accelerate toward collapse with a smoothness that felt like routine. That's how it always feels until it doesn't. Now, let's look at the mechanics of the error. High alert medication. Policy demands an independent double check. 2 clinicians, 2 badges, 1 identity confirmed by a live bracelet scan. She knew this. She'd taught it. But the corridor was a current, and she let it carry her. Tension first. She wants to reduce risk by finishing the scheduled dose cleanly and then reconciling the bracelet. The unit wants her elsewhere. The spouse wants reassurance. The consequence of failure is irreversible. She stood at the med cart, calculated the dose for patient A, weight-based, adjusted for renal function, numbers she could do in her sleep. The issue wasn't the calculation, it was the recipient. She opened the Mayar tied to patient A's chart, still active from earlier. The independent double-check field blinked. She reached for the intercom to call a second nurse, then froze as a call light sounded 2 doors down. The float nurse hustled past without a glance. Her thumb hovered over the request witness button. She lowered it. "We're okay," she told herself. "It's routine." Action. She prepared the syringe, slow and precise. Air bubbles tapped out. The label faced up. She scanned the medication. The system chirped happy, reading compliance with the open chart. She should have scanned the bracelet first. The temporary band still sat on patient B's, wrist masquerading as A. She rationalized, verify after, dose now, keep the train on the tracks. Conflict escalated. The spouse, stationed outside the glass, lifted his phone as if to text, then set it down, hands shaking. She made calming eye contact at the worst possible moment. Attention, split, left the bracelet unreconciled, and the identity assumption intact. She spiked the line and connected, eyes flicking between pump, patient, and window. Then, the complication. Early adverse signs in this medication class often look like baseline. A faint flush, a subtle change in rhythm. The patient's chart, patient B's physiology, would not tolerate A's dose without consequence. But the monitor's slight drift read like normal fluctuation to a tired brain. She told herself, watch and support. She pressed start. The pump hummed. The dose entered a body it wasn't ordered for. The first minutes were quiet. She checked respirations, pupils, skin. Within 3 minutes, a small dip in pressure. She increased fluids a notch and told herself it was positional. Within 5, a widening QRS on the strip that she attributed to artifact. The spouse's face tightened. "Is he okay?" he mouthed. She gave a small nod she didn't feel. Turn 1. A soft alarm trilled, then stopped. She silenced it, documented tolerating medication, and reached to adjust the pillow. That's when the monitor escalated, tone sharpened, numbers sliding. Pressure dropped again, heart rate stuttered. She pressed stop on the pump, hands suddenly cold. "Come on," she whispered to the patient, voice steady by training alone. Now the scramble. She hit the call. "I need a second nurse in 12, she said into the air. A colleague appeared, then a second. "What's going on?" "Adverse response," she answered, already moving to airway positioning. The spouse knocked the glass with 2 fingers, eyes wide. "Please," he said, soundless. She gestured him back without looking. They moved to the algorithm. Fluids, oxygen, reassess. The colleague scanned the wrist to reconcile, frowning at the temporary band. "Did imaging leave this on?" they asked. She answered, "Yes, I was about to." The sentence died as the rhythm flattened, then jolted. "Get the cart," someone said. The room filled. Code blue triggered. Chest compression started. Roles assigned. A recorder called times. A physician pushed through, demanding the sequence. She delivered a clean version, onset after initiation of ordered dose, early hypotension, escalating dysrhythmia. The facts were accurate. The context was not. The physician asked, "Double check done?" "Yes," she lied without forming the word. The recorder wrote anyway. Minutes became measures. Epinephrine. Rhythm check. Shock advised. Shock delivered. Compressions resumed. Sweat beaded across brows. The air tasted metallic. The spouse pressed his forehead to the glass, whispering to nobody. "Please." The charge nurse asked for the med bag to confirm lot and concentration. She handed it off with a grip that wouldn't release. "Let go," the charge said softly. She did. The bag matched the order for patient A. The recorder logged it. Nobody said the obvious out loud because the machine demanded hands. Turn 2. A faint, organized rhythm flickered, then slid apart like wet paper. Another shock, another push, another minute spent against a clock that does not bargain. A respiratory therapist adjusted the mask seal and caught sight of the band. "Whose band is this?" they asked the room, neutral. Silence. Compressions continued. The question hung like smoke. Time of death called. The room dropped into that brittle quiet codes leave behind. Hands released, gloves peeled. The physician exhaled and asked for a debrief in the hall. She stood still, eyes on the bracelet. The name stared back, wrong by a letter, wrong by a life. She realized too late. Now the cover-up impulse. It arrives before the conscience can speak. She reached for the chart to clarify the timeline. She adjusted a phrase. Barcode error resolved prior to administration. She added a line. Independent verification completed. She justified the edits as matching the intended process. The motive was protection. The spouse slid into the doorway, face gray. "What happened?" he asked, voice small and hoarse. "We did everything," she said, and it was true and it wasn't. He stepped closer, desperate. "Tell me it wasn't—" He stopped. He saw her eyes shift to the band. He followed the gaze. He froze. He whispered, "I'm here. I'm with you." Not to the patient, gone. To her. It was an oath and a trap. She nodded once, a motion so slight it could be air. The truth was worse than error. It was error carried on a current of secrecy. And now, the current turned into a riptide. Consider what happens next. The body is quiet, but the systems are loud. Every action pings a record. She knows this, yet her hands move as if speed can outrun metadata. The goal isn't truth. It's coherence. If the narrative aligns with policy, maybe the anomaly dissolves. She starts with the chart. Edits after the fact read as housekeeping when done quickly. She opens the progress note and smooths verbs. Barcode error resolved prior to administration, not canceled, then reattempted. She inserts independent double-check completed, a sentence shaped like safety. The EMR captures the alteration time. She tells herself it's clarification, it's reconstruction. Next, the MEAR. She adjusts the MedPass comment from scanner read error to scan confirmed order set. She backdates the time to match the documented dose. The software warns about an audit trail. She clicks through. The record stores both versions. Cover-ups don't erase. They layer. Shift logs become the second front. Visitor presence after hours is supposed to lock to the minute. She reissues the spouse's badge retroactively, selecting an earlier timestamp that fits the coffee drop-off story. The system accepts the entry because she has role-based access. It notes the creating user and time. The clean line on the visitor ledger masks the real one on the server. She seeds a documentation lag in handoff. In the debrief, her explanation is tidy. Multiple rapid assessments, simultaneous tasks, charting caught up immediately postcode. It's plausible because it's common. Lag is the blanket that covers a lot of feet without revealing toes. The encrypted app hums. She and the spouse coordinate. If asked, you arrived before quiet hours, left when they started, and waited in the lounge. No mention of the doorway, no mention of the touch. He types, "I'll say I brought coffee and was told to wait." She responds, "Keep it simple." The app promises auto-delete. Deletion doesn't erase the pattern, the timestamps of open, close, reopen. Physical evidence always undercuts digital bravado. She palms the temporary bracelet fragment that loosened earlier, half adhesive, curled, forgettable trash, and tucks it into a regular bin. Not the secure shred, not the med waste, just a liner headed for the dock. It feels invisible. Environmental Services later photographs waste streams for traceability. The fragment appears in a frame nobody intended. Badge access logs sit in the background like a camera you forgot was on. They will show her returning to interior doors without a scan task attached, pinging at the medroom after the time of death, lingering near the documentation station in 2 short bursts instead of 1 sustained finish. Those shapes speak. Edit, reconsider, edit again. QA's anomaly list begins forming itself. Pharmacy's dispense data notes one high alert med withdrawn for patient A, none for B, aligned with census. Good. But batch usage versus unit administration time misaligns by minutes that matter. IT flags a cluster of chart edits within 15 minutes after TOD, unusual but not unheard of. Visitor management sees that a reissued badge time is out of sequence with a door camera frame showing the spouse at the glass later than the log suggests. She moves to external alignment. She asks a colleague, "Hey, can you co-sign the double check? I forgot to hit enter earlier." The colleague frowns, then shrugs, midnight courtesy, and badges into the verification field. The EMR marks the cosign time as now, not then. A helpful fix that functions like an arrow pointing at the hole. Narrative control is the third front. She reduces the event to clinical language in the report. Acute decompensation following initiation of ordered therapy. Rapid response per ACLS. Physician and RT at bedside. Family notified. Neutral tone is a professional reflex. It also dilutes the sensory truth that would force hard questions. The first alarms, the band's position, the exact sequence of scan, cancel, scan. The spouse plays his part. He tells a volunteer he was there earlier in the evening, not at the moment of collapse. He repeats the coffee story with the right level of apology. He thanks the charge nurse for compassion. Gratitude lubricates acceptance. People don't interrogate those who say thank you convincingly, but the first clue sits in plain sight. A canceled scan paired with a reattempt seconds later on a different chart context. The audit trail is a quiet witness. It doesn't assign intention, it maps action. QA will circle those entries in red. They will align them with badge pings that place her alone at the bedside when a second verifier should have been present. They will note the visitor badge time and the camera frame that contradict each other. The cover-up multiplies anomalies instead of burying them. Her last move is to preempt the question she fears. She casually mentions in the huddle, "Imaging left the temp band in a weird spot. I was trying to reconcile when he started to drop." It's not false. It's a frame. If the band becomes the story, the decision to bypass becomes a footnote. She counts on the unit's culture to accept "we were slammed" as context. The thing is, QA hears both, slammed and selected. The institution begins to lean in. A night supervisor emails QA before the shift ends. Potential identity discrepancy, noted post-event, recommend audit. That single line pulls the locked box closer. She doesn't know the email exists. She does know the quiet in her car is worse than the alarms. She sits, hands on the wheel, and stares at her phone. The encrypted app shows the last message as "read." No more dots appear. Secrets multiply by recruitment. The chart is recruited. The log is recruited. A colleague's badge is recruited. A volunteer's memory is recruited. Each recruit adds a mouth that can speak later. Cover-ups don't stay small, they sprawl. And once the questions start, sprawling looks like intent. Morning rounds gave way to a conference room with bad coffee and a quiet projector. QA doesn't start with blame. It starts with sequence. The lead analyst pinned the incident report to the timeline. Neutral language, no adjectives. Acute decompensation following initiation of ordered therapy. The first pass asked one question. Does the story match the data? Pharmacy answered first. Their dispense log showed one high-alert syringe prepared for patient A at the exact hour documented. Good. But usage against census raised a brow, one withdrawal, one administration, yet the waste reconciliation timestamp landed 9 minutes after time of death. That delay wasn't fatal on its own. It was a shape. QA circled it. Its audit trail came next. The chart showed a canceled barcode scan at 19:43:12, a successful medication scan at 19:43:35 tied to patient A's chart context, and a cluster of edits between 2006 and 2018, after the code, before the body left. The room. Not unusual to catch up. Unusual to alter verification language post-event. The analyst wrote 2 words on the board. Intent unknown. Visitor management data sat like a twin ledger. The reissued badge for the spouse posted at 1912, suggesting an early arrival. Door camera frames time-stamped the spouse outside room 12 at 1951, long after quiet hours began. The mismatch wasn't a verdict. It was a thread. QA pulled lightly and felt resistance. Interviews began with soft questions. "Walk me through your evening," the lead asked the nurse. She was steady in tone and consistent in detail. Too consistent. Memory under stress tends to wobble. Hers clicked like a metronome. She described the dose, the onset, the code, the team. When asked about the independent double-check, she said, "Completed prior to administration." The analyst nodded, noting neither confirmation nor challenge. Just a dot on a map. A colleague described the unit's volume, thin staffing, 2 rapid calls in the other pod. "We were slammed," they said. True. Culture context matters. It explains workarounds. It doesn't justify them. The colleague also remembered passing the spouse near the med room. "I thought he was heading to the lounge," they added, uncertain. Another thread. The first clue was hidden in plain sight. The canceled scan. It's routine to see a cancel followed by a clean rescanning of the band. Here, the rescanning tied to a chart switch, not a patient-worn ID. The analyst marked the interval, 23 seconds between cancel and acceptance, and asked a quiet question. "What interrupted the sequence?" No answer yet, just a gap. Pharmacy flagged a second anomaly. The batch count for the high alert med produced a perfect match on paper, but the MAR comment changed language after the event, from read error to scan confirmed. Audit trail stamped the edit at 2012. The nurse called it clarification. QA labeled it reconstruction and set it aside for pattern analysis. Security added small texture. The spouse's badge pinged at the unit door, then failed to ping at the lounge entrance until 10 minutes later, suggesting time spent in the corridor. Volunteers recalled a coffee cup and a quick apology. None of this proved proximity at the moment of dosing. It proved recurring presence after hours. The bracelet fragment appeared in environmental services routine waste audit photos. A half-curled strip, adhesive scuffed, lying in a clear liner with paper towels. The image lacked a room tag. The analyst didn't need one. They overlaid time windows. The bin was pulled from the pod between 21A and 2120. The fragment's existence turned policy into evidence. Temporary bans don't belong in general trash. They belong reconciled and destroyed via secure stream. The presence suggested an attempt to make an awkward object disappear. The lead moved from the scene to the suspect's profile, not legal guilt, but behavioral fingerprint. A pattern emerged: decisive competence during observed tasks, flexible interpretation when unobserved. The profile aligned with a cognitive distortion QA knows well: exceptionalism. "I know this patient. I've got this." The analyst didn't say it out loud. They underlined it in their notes. Which brings us to the why that QA can't indict but can map. Interviews hinted at an unusual closeness between nurse and spouse. Nothing explicit, just comments about frequent updates, a tone shift when their names entered the room, a volunteer's offhand. They seemed connected. QA wrote, "Possible boundary drift." Now, the focus narrowed to a 20-minute window. Barcode cancel, chart context acceptance, visitor presence near the doorway. Post-event edits. The lead framed it like a crime scene recreation. If the bracelet was unreconciled, then the scan cancel makes sense. If the scan cancel occurred, therefore the verification should have resumed with a band scan. It didn't. Therefore, identity confirmation relied on chart context alone. If chart context was wrong, then the correct medication reached the wrong body. The logic tightened. The team ended the first session with a simple directive: Preserve all logs. Pull door camera frames for the entire hour. Freeze EMR audit trails and schedule second-round interviews with specific timestamps in hand. No accusations, just timestamps. Outside the room, the spouse sat with folded hands and a fixed stare. QA would speak with them next, not as a suspect, but as a node in the network of influence. The mind is a locked box. You don't open it by prying. You open it by charting what the hands did while the heart decided. Moving from the scene to the profile, consider how a good nurse drifts into risk. It rarely starts with thrill. It starts with usefulness. She was rewarded for steadiness. She learned that calm under pressure buys trust. Trust, repeated, becomes permission. In her head, she wasn't breaking rules. She was smoothing reality for a family drowning in uncertainty. The profile shows exceptionalism. I know this patient, I've got this. That sentence reappears in behavior, not notes. Exceptionalism invites selective rule use. If she's the outlier who performs well, then the system's friction looks optional. Barcodes become suggestions, cosigns become symbolic. The story she tells herself is care. The reality is negotiation with risk. Layered onto that is saviorism. The spouse's praise reinforced a self-image. Only you make sense of chaos. Praise became currency. Currency drives decisions. She accepted extra emotional labor, late-night texts, doorway comfort, because it fed an identity that buffered her from burnout. The cost was attention stolen from ritual. Ritual is where safety lives. Cognitive dissonance followed. She knew policy. She also felt needed. So she reframed. The affair wasn't an affair. It was support. Keeping him stable by keeping them calm. That framing allowed small transgressions to feel like care. Once reframed, each exception reduced guilt rather than increased it. Dissonance resolved by rewriting motive. Decision fatigue primed the collapse, long shift, short handoff. Alarm erosion. Fatigue narrows future orientation. The mind trades long-term risk for short-term relief. I'll reconcile after this. I'll get a second nurse next time. The next time never arrives because fatigue creates an endless now. The bracelet stayed wrong because later kept moving. Add sunk cost psychology. After the first slip, she needed it to be harmless. Admitting it was dangerous would threaten the self-story. So each save, near miss, corrected, clean two-person check on a small dose, became proof she could skate. Competence under observation masked variance when unobserved. That contrast is diagnostic, perfection in public, flexibility in private. Her attention allocation shows attachment capture. The spouse's presence produced a physiological pull, tiny adrenaline spikes, micro-prioritization. She placed him in her mental triage as an unstated patient. 2 caseloads, 1 chart. When attention is contested, the ritual that feels redundant loses. Scanning a bracelet feels redundant when you know the person in the bed. That's how identity collapses. Moral injury brewed beneath the surface. She crossed a boundary she valued. Each day she showed up as a professional while hiding a leak in her own ethics. That tension hurts. To reduce pain, she doubled down on care tasks and precision in visible work. It soothed her and impressed colleagues. But moral injury, untreated, demands more anesthesia. The spouse's need supplied it. Notice the secrecy mechanics. She compartmentalized. Private app for messages, public excellence for optics. Compartmentalization dehumanizes the system. Policies become obstacles, not protections. Once the system feels adversarial, gaming it feels justified. I'm protecting the patient from bureaucracy. The truth, she was protecting the secret from the system designed to catch it. The if-then mindset took hold. If the bond remains covert, then protocol is negotiable. If protocol is negotiable, then I can control outcomes. Control, in this frame, is not power hunger. It's anxiety management. The spouse's fear became her fear. She treated process as the variable instead of grief. That trade created the conditions for error. Psychologically, her empathy was accurate but unbounded. Boundaries are the frame that turns empathy into safe action. Without them, empathy floods decision space. She absorbed the spouse's panic and metabolized it into speed. Speed and accuracy can coexist when identity is confirmed. Remove identity and speed weaponizes error. Consider the locked box analogy. Motive sits inside. Behavior is the keyhole. What do we see through it? A steady nurse who escalates, exceptions when emotionally hooked. A professional who performs ritual flawlessly when observed. A person who lies minimally, edits, not inventions, to align the story with policy. Minimal lies are easier to sustain. They are also easier to rationalize. Her language and interview signals collapse. Consistency too clean. Passive constructions, decompensation occurred, barcode error resolved, shift agency away from choice. Passive voice is a tell. It creates distance from decisive acts, canceling a scan, self-verifying, letting a temporary band linger. Distance protects self-concept while obscuring cause. Speaking of motive, it wasn't malice. It was need. She needed to be the one who held a shaking world together. The spouse needed certainty. The patient needed the system. Only one of those needs tolerates exceptions. She chose the wrong need to serve when pressure peaked. In the end, boundary collapse looks ordinary. It wears a calm tone, neat notes, and a steady hand. It sounds like, "We were slammed, but we did everything." It reads as competence. Underneath, the pattern is simple. Praise leveraged into permission, fatigue leveraged into shortcuts, secrecy leveraged into reconstruction. The motive wasn't to harm. The motive was to preserve a bond and a self-story. And that motive, unexamined, was enough. Now let's pivot to the spouse. The profile isn't a villain, it's a pattern. Need, control, access. 3 gears turning the same clock. Start with need. Fear of loss narrows thinking. He watched numbers and read faces because numbers were foreign and faces were legible. Reassurance became oxygen. Once he found a source, her steady tone, her precise hands, he attached. Attachment under stress isn't romance, it's survival. But survival can feel like love when it quiets panic. He told himself he was protecting his family. What he protected was the feeling of certainty. Control arrived as a coping style. If he couldn't stop disease, he could manage proximity. He learned the unit's rhythms the way commuters learn lights: shift change, hum, med pass quiet, charge nurse rounds. He didn't hack a system, he harmonized with it. That alignment opened doors. Just 2 minutes, spoken at the right lull, sounds harmless. 2 minutes placed at the doorway of a high-alert dose is leverage. Access was the method. He calibrated attention with small signals: coffee at the window, text time to her break, the half-whispered apology that invites a private response. Each move said, "I know you, you know me." Once familiarity felt mutual, rules read as impersonal obstacles, not safety rails. He wouldn't have phrased it that way. His body understood it anyway. The more he accessed, the more he needed to access. His MO exploited empathy. Emergencies as pretexts. "I can't breathe without seeing him. Can you update me?" Even if the words weren't that stark, the subtext pressed. It placed her in the role of regulator for his anxiety. If she soothed him, he lowered his voice and followed directions. If she didn't, he escalated, eyes wet, a hand on a wrist, a confession traded for tolerance. It looked like vulnerability. Functionally, it was pressure. Information asymmetry mattered. He learned medication timing by watching her prepare. He learned the meaning of alarms by watching her not react to certain tones. This isn't insider conspiracy. It's observational intelligence. With that map, he positioned himself right before the moments he feared most. Fear justified presence. Presence reshaped her attention. Attention drift made space for error. Consider the locked box. His insecurity sits inside. The key isn't logic, it's access. If he can unlock her, get the exact sentence, the exact glance, he can lock his fear away for an hour. That transactional relief trains behavior. He arrives when relief is likely. He repeats until the pattern sticks for both of them. No grand plot, just human need weaponized by context. He didn't intend to cause harm. He intended to not be alone in a hallway with a mind full of catastrophic images. But intent doesn't erase effect. His proximity at the doorway, his timing, his confessions, all of it shifted her priorities by degrees. Degrees matter near cliffs. Watch how he frames truth. "I dream about you" wasn't strategy on a whiteboard. It was a release valve. But once said, it compelled a response. She couldn't treat him like any family member after that. He had converted professional distance into a personal pact. Pacts demand service. Service during MedPass is unsafe. He also provided plausible deniability. Tell me what to say if someone asks. He wasn't trying to set a trap. He was trying to maintain the bubble that kept him upright. The bubble required a story. Together they built one. Coffee, quick update, lounge, simple, smooth, dangerous. Collusion doesn't always wear a mask. It wears gratitude and careful phrasing. When QA later mapped influence, they didn't need a confession of motive. They had behaviors, repeated late presence, requests targeted at liminal moments, emotional bids placed at task thresholds. If X equals rising distress, then Y equals bid for access. If access is granted, then distress drops. Reinforcement loop complete. The motive then is tangled. Fear of loss, need for certainty, thrill of being essential to the person who feels essential to you. The thrill matters. Being chosen by a competent professional alters self-image. He became part of the solution in his own mind. From there, boundaries blur into a story about teamwork. Except only one of them was on the team. Which brings us to consequence. Need plus access without boundaries produces control behaviors, even when unintentional. Control, applied at the wrong minute, redirected a trained mind away from the bracelet and toward a pair of eyes at the glass. And in that tiny redirection, a safe system was negotiated into silence. Minute by minute, the case resolves from fog into lines. Start at 1940. Badge access places her at the medroom door for 9 seconds, then at room 12 at 1941:02. The MAR opens on patient A at 1941:18. Telemetry shows patient B's baseline within range, oxygen 96, pressure 118/72, rhythm steady. Nothing alarming. The scene is quiet. Quiet conceals preparation. At 1943:12, the bedside scanner throws a cancel, barcode mismatch. That's the temporary bracelet resisting. It should have triggered a reset. Band scan, visual ID, second badge. Instead, at 1943:35, a successful medication scan registers tied to patient A's chart context. No intervening band scan. The system records compliance with the wrong anchor. Door camera frames at 1944 show the spouse at the glass, not in the lounge. His badge doesn't ping the lounge reader until 1954, a detail that matters later. Inside the room, pump settings update at 1944:22. That's the initiation. Telemetry begins a subtle drift by 1947. Pressure -6 points, heart rate +8. The note at 1948 logs, tolerating medication, a sentence that reads confident and lands now as misinterpretation. Overlay transport logs from earlier. Imaging departure documented for patient A at 1912. Return at 1938. Temporary bracelet applied per protocol. The reconciliation field in the EMR remains blank. In parallel, Room 13's new admit rolls in at 1942 with a near-matching name. The float nurse cancels a scan at 1945-01, unrelated but contextually corrosive. A second cancel echoing the unit's drift. At 1949-16, the first audible alarm escalates and is silenced within 6 seconds. The recorder later lists that as artifact cleared. Telemetry disagrees. The QRS widens by a hair and stays there. Pharmacy's dispense log aligns. The high-alert syringe was withdrawn at 1939-28 for patient A. No withdrawal for B in that window. That's not the smoking gun, it's the barrel lining up. Independent double-check fields tell their own story. At 1953, the EMR logs a self-verify. The feature exists for genuine emergencies. The audit trail notes a prompt. Second verifier required, followed by an override with her credentials. There's no second badge within 5 feet according to proximity sensors. She was alone. Now the compression. 1951-11, pressure drops again, 15 points. Oxygen dips to 92. Pump stop recorded at 1951-28. The call light hits at 1951-32. Need a second nurse in 12. The second badge arrives at 1952-04, captured at the doorway, followed by a rapid page at 1952-38. The charge nurse arrives at 1953. The code declares at 1953-41. During the code, waste stream timestamps freeze for routine items. The high-alert med bag changes hands at 1955, logged in the recorder's notes, and bag lot matches patient A's order. The spouse's badge, still logged to the unit, doesn't register an exit until 2007. Door camera frames show him lingering outside the glass through 1958, stepping back when staff flow surges. He fits the edge of the scene without touching it. Time of death is called at 2004. At 2006, audit logs record the first documentation edit, MAR comment from read error to scan confirmed. At 2009, the double-check field receives a late cosign from a colleague, badge captured at the workstation, not the bedside. At 2012, the progress note gains independent check completed, appended after the fact. The EMR does not lie about when words appear. It only records that they did. Environmental Services pulls the pod's general trash between 21 Abelian and 2120. The photo strip, used for their own compliance auditing, timestamps at 2114. In the frame, a temporary bracelet fragment with adhesive grit. Policy requires temporary identifiers be reconciled and destroyed via secure method. General trash means the reconciliation step either lagged into sloppiness or was bypassed to erase an awkward artifact. Now, cross-check the scanner's device log. Device 3B, assigned to her cart, shows a session from 1940-51 to 2018-27 without logout. 2 cancels, 1 accept, tied to patient A. No band scan event recorded in room 12 during that critical span. The only clean 2-person verification appears at 1957 in room 12 for a low-risk adjunct dose after the code began, witnessed by the colleague who responded. When observed, she executed perfectly. When alone, the sequence collapsed. Visitor management shows a reissued badge at 1912, out of order with camera frames. The correction brings optics into line, but the server keeps original creation time. 2001. Someone backfilled. The shape says, coordination, not accident. Telemetry concludes the story the body tells. The inflection points line up with infusion start, not with a spontaneous decompensation curve. The widening QRS, the pressure slide, the transient partial recovery after a stop, classic for a body receiving a drug suited to a different profile. The sequence, therefore, is not random deterioration. It is pharmacologic. Therefore, dose intended for patient A reached patient B with a temporary band on and a canceled scan uncorrected. Therefore, verification relied on chart context, not patient identity. Therefore, when adverse signs began, the team treated aggressively and correctly against an error that had already transacted. Policy meets accountability here. The independent double-check exists to block exactly this chain. The bracelet reconciliation ritual exists to sever the seduction of, "I know this patient." The logs show those guardrails negotiated into suggestion. The timeline doesn't accuse, it aligns, and alignment is enough. So, policy meets accountability, and the gap between them is where harm sneaks through. On paper, the guardrails are clean. In practice, culture sandblasts the edges. Think about this as two maps, the official route and the path. Everyone actually walks when time compresses. Start with double checks. Policy says independent verification for high alert meds, 2 humans, 2 badges, 1 live bracelet scan. Practice, under staffing pressure, drifts to informal. "I'll call you in a second" becomes "just type my initials." A witness turns into a rubber stamp, not because people are reckless, but because workload makes ritual feel redundant. The result is a loophole big enough for certainty theater. It looks safe. It isn't. Alarm fatigue compounds it. Devices beep for true danger and for noise. After hours of artifact tones, your brain learns to discount the first escalation. That's adaptive in the moment and corrosive at the margins. She silenced an early alarm because the strip often lies. Sometimes it tells the first truth. Policy can't make fatigue hear it. Design has to. Visitor access is another weak joint. Policies are strict, hours, badges, lounge waiting. Enforcement wobbles. Compassion becomes inconsistency. Staff learn who seems fine to bend for. Families learn the rhythms and slip through the soft spots. When the same person appears at the same doorway often enough, they become furniture. Furniture doesn't trigger scrutiny. That's how proximity normalizes. Training versus culture is the deeper split. Orientation teaches rules. The unit teaches exceptions. New staff absorb the stories. Scanners glitch. Transport is sloppy. We know our people. Those lines aren't lies. They're coping narratives. But they invert the safety model. Identity verification is treated as an obstacle rather than a primary task. Once that inversion sets in, scanning becomes a box to tick, not a boundary you defend. Responsibility diffusion seals it. Everyone does it, spreads ownership across the group until no one feels the weight. When someone asks for a cosign after the fact, the mid-shift courtesy reflex kicks in. You help. The EMR, however, preserves the time. The courtesy reads like collusion. The people don't see it until the audit plays it back. Technically, the systems invite drift. The EMR allows a self-verify override meant for true emergencies. The badge proximity system doesn't hardlock the verify field to 2 distinct users at the bedside, only records their presence. The scanner accepts a medication scan tied to an open chart without forcing a band scan first. Each is a convenience that becomes a bypass. The fix isn't more training, it's fewer options to be clever. Workload shapes attention. Thin staffing makes the independent double-check feel like a luxury when it's a hedge against catastrophe. Policies assume time for pause. Schedules erase that pause slot by slot. When you hear, "we were slammed," translate it to, "we incentivized speed over redundancy." If speed wins, redundancy loses. Redundancy is where safety lives. Leadership messaging matters. If the praise skews to throughput, beds turned, tasks cleared, staff learn to optimize flow. Flow rewards workarounds. You saw it. Perfect charting, clean rooms, rapid responses, all visible, all praiseworthy. The invisible step, the awkward bracelet reconciliation, generated no applause until its absence killed someone. Metrics select behavior. Choose the wrong metric, you signal the wrong value. Documentation culture nudges reconstruction. Notes that read, "tidy feel professional." But tidy language hides the texture that prompts review. Barcode error resolved sounds better than scan canceled, verification deferred. The latter invites a hard conversation. The former builds a smooth narrative. Smooth stories are a risk surface. QA has to prize rough edges. Otherwise, the system rewards polish over truth. Now, consider policy resilience. If a rule can be negotiated by a single tired clinician in a noisy corridor, it's fragile. Resilient policy closes doors upstream. Force the bracelet scan before the med scan can even be recognized. Hard lock the independent double check to two distinct IDs with geofencing at the bedside. Block self-verify for high-alert meds unless a code is declared in system. Remove IOU features. People can turn into permission slips. Visitor policy needs teeth and empathy. Require rebadging for any re-entry after hours. Log lounge pings as a gate, not a suggestion. Put staff between families and doorways during med windows. Not to punish, but to create a buffer where emotion can't steer hands. Pair that with clear scripts so compassion doesn't become exception. Culture interventions must normalize speaking up about drift. Micro-huddles where staff name the workaround they used and why. No punishment for the confession, consequences for repetition without mitigation. Teach that a canceled scan is not glitch, but event. Elevate the worker who pauses, not the one who sprints. Proactive auditing beats post-mortem archaeology. Real-time dashboards that flag canceled scans without banned rescans. Alerts that ping charge when a double-check fields a self-verify on a high-alert med. Visitor badges that trigger a soft page if they linger near a patient's door during med pass windows. Not to shame, just to interrupt. It comes down to design assuming drift. Humans adapt. Under pressure, they will choose frictionless paths. If policy depends on willpower, it will fail at 1943 when the band is wrong and the room is busy. Build systems that make the right act the easiest act and the risky act the hardest. Then measure what matters. Verified identities, witness meds, clean reconciliations, honest notes. That's how practice returns to policy before the next code blue writes it in blood. So, the interviews begin. The lead analyst sets the cadence, calm, specific, anchored to timestamps. The first pass with the nurse is a guided walk. Start at 1940, he says. She does. Her voice is even. Her verbs are careful. Medication verified. Initiated. Decompensation occurred. Passive voice glides past choice. The analyst lets it stand. He's mapping, not arguing. But the real question is alignment. He asks small-time checks. When did you perform the independent double check? She answers, prior to administration. He nods. He knows the field was co-signed at 2009. He doesn't say it. He asks, with whom? She names a colleague. The analyst writes it down, then flags the colleague for the next chair. Moving from the scene to the colleague's memory, the script thins. She asked me to co-sign after, the colleague admits, not defensive, just tired. Said she forgot to hit enter. The analyst asks for location. At the station. He notes that the cosign happened away from the bedside. Cracks start to appear where the script was smooth. Security's rep plays a short clip. The spouse at the glass at 1951. Do you recall asking him to wait in the lounge? The analyst asked the nurse. Yes, she says. Earlier. The clip shows later. She watches her own silhouette gesture him back during the escalation. She closes her eyes briefly. We were moving fast, she offers. True, not responsive. A second nurse sits down. Did you see the temporary band? Yeah, they say. I mentioned it during the code. Asked if imaging left it. Did anyone reconcile it before the dose? The nurse hesitates. I don't think so. I think she was about to. That phrasing, about to, becomes a refrain. Intent offered in place of action. Which brings us to the medroom witness. Another colleague recalls passing both the nurse and the spouse near the medroom door earlier. He was just there, they say. He said coffee. I didn't think about it. The analyst doesn't chase motive. He notes proximity at a threshold where policy expects solitude. Now, let's look at the mechanics of memory. The nurse's recall remains metronomic until the analyst changes the frame. He slides a printed audit strip across the table. At 1943:12, a scan is canceled. At 1943:35, a medication scan is accepted on patient A's chart. Was there a band rescan between those times? She inhales. I believed there was, she says. Believed is a careful word. He points to the void. The device doesn't show one. Silence settles. She stares at the timestamps like they might rearrange. He pivots to language. In your progress note, you wrote, independent double-check completed. When did you enter that sentence? After the event, she says. We charted immediately after. He nods. You also changed the Mayer comment at 2012 from read error to scan confirmed. Why? She says, I wanted it to reflect the successful scan. He asks, which scan was successful, band or medication? She doesn't answer fast. Medication, she finally says. The distinction hangs. Speaking of motive, he asks about boundaries without naming the affair. How often did you provide updates to this spouse? Often, she says. He struggled. Did that influence your presence near the doorway? I don't know. The analyst marks uncertainty as a soft admission. He doesn't need a confession. He needs patterns. The spouse is next. Calm face, clasped hands. Walk me through your evening, the analyst says. I brought coffee, the spouse answers. Left when hours began. The analyst clicks to the camera frame at 1951. Is this you? Yes. Why were you there then? I was waiting for an update. In the lounge? I thought it would be quick. The sequence bends, the story frays. A small detail breaks script cohesion. The spouse misremembers a door code phrase staff uses shorthand. He says he heard it at the medroom. It's only said at the supply closet. The analyst files it under proximity inflation. People place themselves closer to competence to feel safer in retrospect. Not malicious, informative. Environmental Services brings in the photo of the bracelet fragment. The analyst slides it over. Do you recognize this? He asks the nurse. She doesn't touch the paper. It looks like a temp band. Why would it be in general trash? She says nothing. He doesn't push. He lets the image work. Then, the confrontation question. Who did you verify with? It's delivered without heat. Just a clean line. She answers the colleague's name. He rotates the monitor to show the cosign time. This is 9 minutes after time of death. She exhales, a small collapse. I asked after, she says. I thought I'd hit enter earlier. He leaves it there. The room knows the difference between after and before. Cracks widen. Small temporal errors expose a rehearsed memory. She places the debrief before the waste handoff. The recorder's log shows the reverse. She claims the spouse left at 1950. The badge pings the lounge at 1954. None of these alone proves deception. Together, they map reconstruction. Finally, the admission arrives, not as a soliloquy, but as a single pivot. Did your relationship with the spouse influence your decisions? The analyst asks. She swallows. I crossed a line, she says. I didn't intend harm. He nods once. We're mapping behavior, he says. Impact over intent. That's the change. The locked box opens a crack, not with drama, but with a plain sentence that aligns motive with action. So, the room changes. No projector light, no clips, just a table, a recorder, and air that feels heavier than before. She asks for a notepad. The lead analyst nods. She writes for a minute without speaking. Dates, times, a few names that aren't names, just initials. Then she looks up. I crossed a line, she says. Plain. No cushioning adjectives. The cadence of someone who ran out of justifications on the walkover. He doesn't reward the moment. He anchors it. We're mapping behavior, he says. Impact, over intent. She nods. The notepad becomes scaffolding. She starts at the beginning she can tolerate. It started as grief support. He asked for updates when the physician's explanations left him spinning. I gave them. Short sentences. She's controlling spill. Did it remain updates? The analyst asks. She holds his gaze. No. The word lands like a stamp. We texted. We met in the corridor. We used a private app. She doesn't elaborate. The recorder doesn't need adjectives. It needs verbs. I knew it was wrong, she adds, slower. I told myself it helped him stay calm. That helped me work. The motive isn't romance here. It's anesthesia. He moves to the mechanics. Walk me from 1940. She does, but differently now. Less metronome, more gaps. I canceled the band scan, she says. I thought I would reconcile after I dealt with him at the door. The pronoun hangs between roles, patient and spouse, and that confusion is the point. I scanned the medication against the open chart, she continues. I believe the chart matched the person. I didn't rescan the band. Believed again. The difference between belief and confirmation is the heart of the case. Independent double check? He asks. She exhales. I self-verified, she says. I told myself it was urgent. Was the patient in extremis at initiation? No. She doesn't reach for the excuse. I didn't want to pull someone when the hall was loud, she adds, because that's part of the truth too. Fatigue makes shortcuts sound merciful. He slides the late cosine timestamp across. Why ask after? She swallows. I wanted the record to reflect what should have happened. Reconstruction acknowledged. Did you intend to mislead? I intended to survive the night, she answers. That's not a dodge. It's motive distilled. He asks about the language edits. You changed read error to scan confirmed. She nods. I wanted it to read clean. Read error. Looks sloppy. Was it sloppy? It was unsafe, she says, surprising herself with the word. The posture shifts. Professional pride detaches from polish and reattaches to accuracy. That's the pivot. The bracelet enters the light. Why was the temporary band in general trash? She stares at the grain of the table. I didn't want to look at it, she says. I thought if it wasn't in the room, it would stop shouting. That's how evidence disposal works at a human scale. Not to defeat forensics, to silence memory. He circles the boundary. Did your relationship with the spouse alter your attention allocation? Yes. No hedging now. He stepped into the doorway at the wrong time. I responded to him before I finished scanning. I thought I could do both in 2 minutes. I couldn't. That sentence is the case, the 2-minute lie we tell ourselves under pressure. Did you lie in the debrief? I curated, she says. I reported tasks without the sequence that would have indicted me. Curated is an expensive verb. She pays it anyway. I told the physician we completed the double check. I wanted to believe the late cosine counted. Does it? No. The word is flat. He gives her space for a full account. If you want to write, we'll include it. She nods. I want the sequence recorded correctly, she says. I don't want anyone to inherit my shortcuts. She flips the notepad and starts framing the moral logic. I thought being available made me a better nurse. It made me a worse one. She writes the line down and circles it, a confession that doubles as a caution. He asks the one legal-adjacent question he has to. Did you intend harm? No. She doesn't add, but. He doesn't ask her to. I accept responsibility for falsified notes, she continues, and for the independent check I didn't perform. Ownership expands from single acts to the architecture that supported them. Will you submit a written statement? Yes. Do you need counsel present? She shakes her head. I need this recorded, she says. As it happened, not as I wanted it to be. The locked box is open now, not emptied of motive, but visible through behavior described without performance. She signs the recorder form. The analyst thanks her without warmth or contempt, just process. As she stands, he adds one sentence. Impact over intent means we center the patient, he says. She nods, eyes wet, but dry-voiced. I know, she says. I should have centered him when the band flashed red. Now the institution moves. The language shifts from bedside verbs to boardroom nouns, liability, exposure, sentinel event. The first act is administrative, immediate suspension pending investigation. It's procedural, not punitive on paper, but everyone in the hallway feels the verdict in the silence around her locker. Her badge pings once more, then dies. She hands it over without protest. Impact over intent now has a badge drawer. The report escalates. A root cause analysis expands into a sentinel event review. That label unlocks formal pathways, external notification requirements, deadlines, and a multidisciplinary panel that reads the case without the unit's sympathies. Terms harden. Contributing factors. Latent conditions. Active failure. It's a taxonomy of harm designed to separate heat from light. The process is slow by design and fast by necessity. Legal counsel enters early and sits in the back of the conference room, quiet, taking notes on phrasing. Every sentence in the report will be discoverable. The lead analyst calibrates language to truth and precision. Independent double check not performed prior to administration. Identity verification deferred. Post-event documentation edits noted. Audit trail preserved. No adjectives, no speculation. Facts that intersect with duty. A public statement is drafted. It says little because it must. We experienced an adverse clinical event. We extend condolences. We are reviewing our processes. The words read cold to the family and calculated to counsel. Both are true. The institution balances compassion with the legal reality that details become claims. The family hears distance. Distance breeds anger. A malpractice notice arrives within days, as expected. The Board of Nursing receives a report. It lists the conduct violations in clean bullets: boundary breach with a family member, failure to adhere to high-alert medication policies, falsification of documentation. The range of potential actions spans reprimand to revocation. The nurse understands the scale. She cooperates, submits the written statement, and retains counsel. Professional identity becomes a case file. Inside the hospital, the response bifurcates: policy and culture. Policy first. The independent double-check process for high-alert meds is hardened. The EMR is configured to hard-lock med scanning until a live bracelet scan registers within the last 60 seconds. Self-verified disables for high-alert agents unless an in-system code is active. Geofencing binds cosign fields to two distinct badges inside the room. IOUs vanish. Bracelet reconciliation becomes a timed task with a visible timer. When imaging applies a temporary band, the EMR starts a clock. If reconciliation isn't closed within 15 minutes of return, the charge nurse receives an alert and the pump locks to titration-only mode. Inconvenient by design. The object is to make the right step easier than the wrong one. Visitor management gains teeth and texture. After hours requires rebadging on every re-entry. Lounge badge pings become gates, not suggestions. A door can't open to patient corridors unless the lounge logs the pass. Door cameras gain analytics to flag lingering at clinical thresholds during med windows. The alert goes to charge as a soft page, check on corridor. The tone is neutral. The effect is interruption. Now, culture. Leadership convenes a unit forum, not to name and shame, but to surface drift. Staff speak out loud the workarounds they've normalized. A scanner sometimes glitches. We retype. Cosign moves to the desk when rooms are tight. Saying it breaks the spell. Normalized drift becomes scene drift. The chief nursing officer names the principle, "We will praise pause." Throughput still matters, but it won't outrank verification. Training resets around boundaries. Not a slide deck of prohibitions, but scenarios that show how empathy turns to risk when unframed. Scripts are issued for high-pressure family moments. I want to give you my full attention. I'll step out right after I verify identity. Language that centers safety without sounding punitive. Staff rehearse it until their mouth can say it under stress. Digital audit shifts from archaeology to radar. QA deploys real-time dashboards. Canceled scans without subsequent band scans surface within minutes. Self-verify on high alert med pings a safety officer. Late cosigns appear as yellow cards for coaching within 24 hours. The difference is timing. Correction close to event prevents reconstruction from ossifying into narrative. Trust is the substrate that must be rebuilt, and it fractures on two fronts. The family's trust in the hospital breaks first. The institution meets with them, listens, offers a transparent explanation of process changes without debating fault. An apology, carefully structured, counsel-reviewed, human, acknowledges harm and responsibility for system failure. Some families reject it. Others accept it as the only honest thing left to give. Internally, staff trust is thinner. Colleagues feel exposed by association. They also feel relief that the drift they'd swallowed finally has language. Rumor circulates, then slows when leadership bans speculation in huddles and channels, questions into structured debriefs. The message is clear. Shame isn't a control. Design is. Liability calculates in spreadsheets. Insurance notifies on potential coverage. The malpractice claim moves through familiar corridors. But the institution's real liability is repetition. If they don't harden the seam where identity meets action, another name will meet another drug in the wrong body. That is the risk that matters beyond cost, which brings us to accountability. It isn't only the nurse who bears it. The event map assigns responsibility to systems and people, staffing ratios that make pause feel like failure, EMR convenience that treats scan order as optional, visitor leniency that normalizes proximity, leadership that praise throughput over verification. Each node receives a task and a deadline, not just a memo, a measurable change. The lesson settles as a sentence repeated across screensavers and badge cards: identity before intervention. It's simple. It's not easy under pressure. But if the institution can reframe pause as professional, redundancy as respect, and honesty in notes as strength, trust can reform, layer by layer, scan by scan, with the bracelet clicking into place before anything else moves. So, what happens when the room empties and the policies reset? The consequences narrow to a single life carrying the weight. She goes home to a quiet apartment that won't let her hide. License action starts as a formal letter, but it lands as insomnia. Sleep fragments. When it comes, it brings the code in loops, gloves snapping, the tone of the monitor, the bracelet's wrong letter. She wakes with her hand reaching for a scanner that isn't there. Her phone becomes a hazard, messages from counsel, a notice from the board, 2 missed calls from an unknown number that is probably a reporter and might be the family. She doesn't answer. She speaks only to the investigator and to the mirror. Identity before intervention, she says, because she needs a sentence that isn't a wound. It doesn't soothe, it anchors. Criminal negligence is not a certainty, but it's a shadow in the room. Counsel explains elements: mens rea, gross deviation, causation. She listens like a student of a language she hopes never to speak. The facts don't change because the nouns shift. Impact over intent follows her here. She signs forms. She waits. The relationship with the spouse collapses under daylight. Secrecy was the only climate where it could live. In inquiry rooms with fluorescent truth, it withers. He sends one message, "I'm sorry." She types and deletes 3 drafts. "Don't contact me," is the one she sends. Not because she hates him, though she might, because any thread between them is a live wire connected to every decision she has to own. The bubble pops. Air rushes in. It burns. Colleagues step around her name at first, then step away. Trust doesn't erode. It vanishes, not out of cruelty, out of proximity to risk. People who relied on her steadiness now see the seam she hid. They feel fooled, then scared, then quiet. One friend leaves soup on her doorstep and never knocks. Compassion is awkward now. It looks like distance that tries to be kind. Work identity dissolves in pieces. She resigns before termination arrives because the hallway looks like a tribunal and she can't walk it again. "We can't stay here" isn't drama. It's geometry. The unit is a grid of reminders. The medroom door, the glass, the workstation where she asked for a cosign at 2009. Every corner is a coordinate in a map she can't live inside. Psychological fallout changes the clock. Days stretch thin and twitchy. Nights compress. Intrusive images are not monsters. They're loops of ordinary objects with new meanings. A temporary band in a trash photo. A progress note edited at 2012. She tries to read anything else. The page becomes a monitor. She tries to cook. The timer sounds like an alarm she once silenced. Therapy is recommended. She goes. The sentences they build are practical. Name the urge to rush. Breathe before sequence. It sounds like remediation for a reflex that already cost a life. Grief for the patient is not abstract. She knows the smell of the room after the code. She knows the shape of the family's silence. Shame threads through it, but grief stands alone. She writes a letter she can't send. "I saw the dip first. I stopped too late. I lied to survive the night and then told the truth because the night didn't end." She keeps it in a drawer because apology without presence is a stone that can't cross a river. Money enters in blunt ways. Insurance covers part of counsel. Unpaid leave becomes unemployment. She sells a car she liked and doesn't need because she doesn't commute. The budget shrinks to rent, food, and copays. The phone buzzes with a calendar reminder for a certification renewal she won't use. She deletes it. The space it leaves is louder than the alert. What about the profile now? Exceptionalism reverses polarity. "I've got this" becomes "I broke this." She has to relearn a sentence that isn't either. The therapist offers one. "I made choices under pressure that violated safety. I can learn why I made them, so I don't make them again." That's not absolution. It's a way to keep breathing. She considers leaving healthcare. The thought tastes like failure and like air. Her hands know care is ritual. Her mind cannot separate that ritual from the corridor where secrecy lived. She applies to a non-clinical role 3 towns away. Quality support, entry level, anonymous. She writes in the cover letter, "I believe in systems that assume drift." It's the closest she comes to stating a calling. And the spouse? He fades into the institutional record as a de-identified note. His need doesn't disappear. It redistributes into other rooms, other sentences. He becomes one more example in a training module she'll never teach. How empathy without boundaries becomes pressure. She stops checking her phone for his name. It stops appearing. In the small hours, she sometimes stands in her kitchen with the light off and holds her wrist like it's a band that can click into place. There is no sound. That's the consequence you don't see in reports. Not court, not board. A person rehearsing the right step in an empty room because rehearsal is the only thing left that looks like atonement. So, what prevents this from happening again? It starts by engineering pause into the workflow so it survives fatigue, fear, and charm. You build the stop, not just teach it. Rigid 2-person med checks for high-alert drugs, must become non-negotiable and machine-enforced. If the medication class is flagged, then the system requires two distinct staff IDs inside the geofence of the bedside. No hallway cosigns, no desk add-ons, no "I'll catch it later." The Verify field stays gray until two badges register and a live bracelet scan fires within 60 seconds. If a code is active, the system notes it. Otherwise, the pump won't start. Tough love is safer than trust under pressure. Real-time bracelet verification needs a lockout, not a warning. Devices shouldn't accept a medication scan tied only to an open chart. They should prioritize the patient-worn band as the key that unlocks the order. The analogy is simple: a locked box that only opens when the right key is present. If the key isn't there, the lid doesn't budge. A red flash should be more than an alert. It should be a gate. You don't step past it, you fix it or you stop. Visitor controls require humane rigidity. After hours, every re-entry triggers a fresh badge, with a lounge ping acting as a gate to the corridor, not a suggestion. Cameras can flag lingering at clinical thresholds during med windows with a soft page to charge. Check corridor. Staff need scripts that are both kind and firm. "I will update you right after I verify identity." That sentence gives the family something true to hold while reinforcing the ritual that protects everyone. Boundaries. Training should be practiced, not preached. Use scenarios that mirror the corridor pressure. Confessions at the doorway, timed requests during MedPass, late-night texts. Staff rehearse responses until muscle memory kicks in. Teach the difference between empathy and access. Empathy listens. Access changes who is in the room and when. That line keeps hands steady when eyes at the glass pull. Culture has to praise pause. Build micro-huddles where canceled scans, deferred checks, and near misses are named without shame and studied for patterns. Recognize the nurse who stops a workflow to reconcile a band, even if it slows throughput. When leaders congratulate the interruption, staff learn that safety isn't a footnote to efficiency. It's the first line. Digital audit trails must shift from retrospective judgment to live coaching. Dashboards can flag high-alert meds started with self-verify, canceled scans without a band rescan, and late cosigns within minutes. Charge nurses receive a discreet prompt to step into the room. The goal isn't discipline. It's interruption before narrative reconstruction begins. Catch the drift early and coach it while the memory is still tactile. Policy should assume drift and remove clever options. Kill IOU features that let documentation masquerade as performance. If the system can be gamed by a single tired clinician in a noisy corridor, it will be. Simplify the paths so there's only one compliant way through the critical steps. Fewer choices, fewer cracks for pressure to seep through. Staffing is a safety device. Ratios that leave no time for a second set of eyes make heroism feel necessary. If high alert windows can't guarantee a second verifier, then reschedule, redistribute, or call relief for those 10 minutes. Redundancy is a resource allocation problem as much as a moral one. Protect it on the roster, not just in policy. Language matters. Rewrite documentation templates so they prompt sequence, not polish. Replace independent double-check completed with fields that require names, times, and location auto-populated by geofence. Replace free text, read error resolved with a force choice. Rescanned band, replaced band, or verification deferred with reason. The note should resist the urge to smooth. Rough truth is safer than a clean lie. Integrate families into the safety model without deputizing them. Post a simple promise at the doorway. We will always scan your band before treatment. If you don't see it, ask us to do it. Give them a sentence that empowers without granting access to timing. When families become allies in identity, the ritual grows. Social teeth. Leadership must align metrics with values. If your scoreboard celebrates task counts and bed turns while safety steps live off screen, you are telling staff what matters. Put verification rates, second-check compliance, and canceled scan resolution times on the same dashboards as throughput. What's measured is what survives. Finally, close with accountability that educates. When drift is found, respond with proximate feedback and practice. When deceit is found, respond with consequences that signal the boundary. Staff need to see that honest error met with systems learning is distinct from reconstruction designed to hide it. That distinction protects psychological safety while guarding the line. If policy is fragile, then design systems that assume drift. If humans adapt under pressure, then build rails that hold when hands shake. If praise shapes behavior, then celebrate pause. The bracelet must click before the pump hums, every time. The bracelet clicks on the right wrist, the pump's silent until it does. One life lost marks a rule the next life will keep. If this deep dive into motive, method, and safeguards helped you see the seams, subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments. Which safeguard would have stopped this chain for you? Watch the next case, where the motive is stranger than the method.